We welcome you warmly, our online guests, our Values 20 global community. Thank you for being here today. Our local community who have chosen to join us online, we greet you and we warmly welcome you to the proceedings today. So Values 20 is a global initiative that was founded in Saudi Arabia in 2020, as you might have seen in the video. It runs parallel to the G20 and aims to deepen our understanding of how values can influence public policy. By grounding behavior in values, we hope to inspire meaningful change in our society, within and by individuals, communities, and society at large. In line with South Africa's G20 priorities, V20 South Africa asks, how do we enable the G20 themes of solidarity, equality, and sustainable development through a focus on values? Given our national challenges, we have chosen 5 values to focus on: dignity, Ubuntu, integrity and ethical governance, agency and accountability, and equity. And the societal driver of that is values-based leadership, which is also receiving our attention. To drive this agenda, we are working through 2 main channels, our research and advocacy streams. The research stream is primarily about crafting the communiqué that is a G20 requirement, and it is going to be presented at 2 key forums. The V20 summit, which is happening on the 16th and 17th of October this year, and the G20 social summit, which is happening on the 18th to the 20th of November. We currently have about 20 scholars working on the communiqué as we speak, working in 3 different areas: equality, sustainable development, and solidarity. In June this year, a call for papers is going to be opened where we will invite not only commentary, but also participation from our global community. Our advocacy campaign, Living Values, will unfold over 3 years to embed values more deeply in South African life. The first step, awareness through dialogue, strategic partnership, civic engagement, and social media. I want to emphasize that our strategy is not about driving values as a moral imperative, even though it is one. Values provides the opportunity for a narrative which enables a purpose-led life. Therefore, our invitation is not to create a moral congregation where you listen. It is an invitation to join and host conversations about why values are important, about why they matter, and why they matter for society. I would like to now tell you a little bit about the agenda for today. Oh, wait, before I do that, I actually want to outline one more thing. Under the leadership of 6 advocacy stream leaders, we have already made good progress in our advocacy efforts. Many of the strategic partners who we already have onboarded are represented here today. And I want to thank you for your vision and your partnership at this early stage in the project. We look forward to expanding these partnerships with our values-orientated organizations in South Africa and beyond to bring South Africans together to promote equality and focus on sustainable development and global unity. Before outlining today's agenda, I want to acknowledge the incredible team behind this effort. We have over 60 volunteers powering Values 20 South Africa. When we, this is Tabea and I, invited Prof Mohale to serve as our Sherpa, he emphasized the need to involve senior leaders from industry. These leaders have been brought on board as shepherds, and we will continue to grow this cohort of values-based allies who will lead values conversations at strategic levels of South African society. I also want to extend a heartfelt thanks to our steerco and our administrative team. We now have over 60 volunteers working on the project. I also want to thank our global V20 partners who support us with leadership, guidance, and of course, the vibrant social media presence that you might already have seen as part of our V20 portfolio. We are not launching an initiative here in South Africa. We are catalyzing a movement that is rooted in values, driven by a community, a global community, one aimed at shaping a future that we can all be proud of. I would like to now invite Professor Bonang Mohale, who is our Sherpa, to address you. And after Prof has given his address, I'm going to play a short video by one of our shepherds, who is well known to all of you, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. And thereafter, we are going to be having a panel discussion, which includes some members of our shepherd community and my co-chair, Tabea, Tshesane. Prof?
If this is your country, where are your stories? What are your whispers? These profoundly gravity and yet authentically simple words are a title of a book of J. Edwards Chamberlain, who is a emeritus professor of English and comparative literature at the University of Toronto. He was trying to find the middle ground. You see, if we don't tell our stories, some people will tell our stories in a manner that we may not like. So the issue about values is less theoretical and much more practical so that it can touch people's lives. When our forebears went to struggle, and later on the 27th of June, 1955 in Kliptown, and to be blessed on the 27th of April, 1994, with the opportunity to usher in our democracy. This was always about no more than just two things. On the one hand was to improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people. On the other was to bring about a better life for all, not just for elected officials. 31 years into democracy, we are much further from that objective and ideal than we would have liked. So the significance of launching this at this place, at this time, in this country, when so many of us dare to hope that joy and peace will prevail in this country, is not lost. Not only at the constitutional hill, which is the supremacy of all the institutions that we have, but also in the female prison. Chinua Achebe is an author and a poet. In perfect Igbo, opines that he is a fool, he who treats his own brother worse than a stranger. Because when two brothers fight to the death, a stranger will inherit your father's estate. That anger with your kith and kindred, flesh and blood, must only be skin deep, never bone deep. That when your own flesh has made a mistake, they need to be saved, not blamed. 31 years into democracy, poverty still has primarily a black and feminine face. We might celebrate that South Africa has now regained its #1 spot as the biggest economy in Africa. But it does so at a GDP of 400 billion US dollars. It was the same in 2016. So what it means is that nominally, we have gone backwards, and you feel it in your back pocket. Our discretionary purchasing power and disposable income buys us less today compared to the same period in 2016. And that's how values come to life. Not the values that we can post on our walls and read them so that we feel good, but maybe values that are imprinted in blood, in our hearts and in our psyche, so that we live it. 67% of South Africans, 65 million of us, don't have enough salary to last them a month. 31 years into democracy. Malaysia became free from the British colony, and there's a relationship that is quite interesting between the colonizer, the oppressor, and the racist, that you end up liking them. So when they became free, I don't think it was an accident that they asked 3 British composers, the very people they're trying to run away from, to compose their national anthem. Today's Malaysia's national anthem comes from one of those 3 composers. We have done very little to dismantle the structure, the ecosystem that have ensured that 31 years into democracy, the people that have benefited the most from this democracy are not the majority of our people, but the 3 communities. So I'm hoping that by today's conversation, we'll talk about no more than 3 important values that can then translate in our behavior. Because I think it's not useful, maybe outrightly naive, if not patently stupid, to expect white people to voluntarily give up their own privilege. So it was no surprise that yesterday the DA went to court to challenge the employment equity, whose job it is to right the wrongs of the past, whose intent is to reverse and correct racism. Because maybe, like Malaysia, we have an interesting relationship with our 400 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, and 48 years of institutionalized apartheid, that we are still going to the same colonizers oppressors and racist and asking them for permission for us to improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people and wish for a better life for all, not just for elected officials. And this came to life when the first laureate of the Nobel Peace Prize, Chief Albert Luthuli, looked at his own organization, the ANC, and said, you don't want even your worst enemy at their moment of greatest need to exclude you as a solution. Because you see, when you go to the oppressor to ask for a solution for you to get out of oppression, it is always likely that the solution will involve the oppressor. Always. Because the duration of oppression is never determined by the oppressor, but always by the oppressed. So 52.5% of the population that doesn't look like me, that is female. And the more than 90% that is black. It's not poor because they are lazy. They are poor because the system and the die is cast against them. So failure, black failure, it's not personal. It's both systemic and systematic. So we're hoping to unravel it with the values that we agree. Because you see, when you agree that your values are inclusive socio-economic growth, you have to look around and say, have we touched, have we impacted the way our people have a relationship with money? Because if we haven't, then it is just good grammar, good English, but meaningless. The structure was only premised on 3 things. That's why our values ought to be no more than 3. We've adopted 5 to make it easy for us to have a choice. So the first was, can we create a crucible of cheap labor forever? Today, we are still providing black cheap labor, not just to the mines, but to the entire South African economy. The second was, these blacks must risk it all, go to the belly of the earth, and our masters, the British Empire, will have the first right of refusal to this price of gold. The third was, they'll scratch around and find diamonds in their own country, but we will determine the price. Hence the creation of the London Sales Organization. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, where you grow your own tomatoes, you nurture them and you water them and you talk to them. And once they are okay, you stand by the side of the road and it's the motorist that stops and says, no, 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 I will determine the price. And we've done nothing to dismantle that structure. So values in and of themselves can't be very useful until they find meaning and purpose and intent in touching our people. So the next 31 years can, on a composite basis, be substantially better than the previous 31. Of all the things that we could do, how did we land up where we are? And by choice, we say we are going to get into a coalition with the DA. That has no demonstrable track record of cooperating with anybody or anything, where we don't agree with on anything. In fact, we are violently opposed on all the transformative instruments. They oppose us on broad-based black economic empowerment. They oppose us on Bella Act for 2 reasons. One, because they want to retain their language but also the admission policy, so that we have more clean fontaines that are just for white people. And they say, no, it's not only for white people, it's everybody that subscribed to an Afrikaner culture. We've had Orania for 31 years, and yet we know it's against the Constitution, and we've done nothing. They don't agree with us on not NHI because it sounds complex. The definition we didn't create. It was the 189 countries of the United Nations who called it universal equitable access to good quality healthcare. Who could be opposed to that? Until and unless we change that, I'm afraid that the 2 weeks in July of 2021 is going to happen again and again and again, and unless you and I change it. Let me just end by saying it is called Cornhill as a short for Constitution Hill, because this is a holy place in God's own country, blue skies, African sunshine. Because we say we've got the best constitution in the world, because it's a constitution that tells us how we constitute government. That's why it's called the Constitution. It says it's the best constitution in the world, not because of what's contained in the main body of the 198 chapters of the Constitution. It says it's the best because of what is contained in the one pager called the preamble to the Constitution. And it starts with the profound words, we the people, not the politicians. It takes over from the 27th of June, 55 in Kliptown, when it says South Africa belongs to all who live in it and who are explicit, black and white. But it's not sustainable that the whites continue to do well, whilst the black wallow in the surplus of their imagination. And it implores and mandates you and I to correct these past imbalances. It says it's the best constitution in the world because it rests on no more than 3 of these pillars. 3 is a magic number. Number 1, it says it's a constitutional democracy. There are many countries that go to elections every now and then, but the outcome is predetermined. We chose that our constitution will be the pillar. Not just democracy, but constitutional democracy. Democracy based on the Constitution. That's why when the president of the country does not want to obey it, the courts then make a determination. The second, it says, it is premised on social justice. The last talks about not just human rights, but fundamental human rights. There's 30 of them that United Nations have enacted. Yes, there's a freedom of association, freedom of speech. You can kiss whoever you want these days. But it also talks about freedom from hunger. Can we come up with values that make it possible for these black people also to have something to lose? Because if they don't, they will burn their library. The only one that serves the 2 adjoining towns. They'll wake up in the morning and burn the fire truck that they themselves know they might need at 2 in the morning when they're in the spot of bother. Our democracy is not sustainable unless it's premised on a bedrock of values. Values are the North Star. They are not fair weather. They don't move, they don't change. We are where we are purely and simply because those who call themselves our leaders have succumbed to greed. That's what it is, nothing more. And because of greed, then they agitated and orchestrated for state capture. And because of state capture, then it was easy for us to be victims of bribery, stealing, and cheating. That's why we're going to have this conversation this morning, so that we as the people, can talk about no more than 3 values that when our detractors don't want to work with us, we can look at these values and say, but it's called a democracy. It needs to be just, fair, and equitable. And it needs to be inclusive. And we say inclusive, we mean including all the Black people and all the women and the others. So I thank you from the centerpiece of the people of my heart for finding time in your busy schedule of all the things you could do on this cold morning to come and have this conversation with us. Because when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. So if this is your land, where are your stories? What are your whispers?
Thank you, Prof. I'm now going to invite our tech team to play a video of Arch Makoba. But before I do that, I'd like to give you an overview of the shepherds I mentioned earlier who support Prof. Bonang Mohale at a leadership level. So we have Nolita Fakude, we have Mr. Sizwe Natana, Mr. Mashishi, who you will soon see is part of our panel, Archbishop Thabo Makoba, Professor Tuli Madonsela, Futhi Matoba, Professor Kurt April, Dr. Roger Latchman, and Ian Furr. We have also amongst us today our values and advocacy, and research stream leaders, and I'd like to introduce them to you, just so you could, after the session, if you want to say hello. Dr. Dumisani Magadlela is here. If you guys could just raise your hand so people know who you are. Monde Ndlovu, Nyaleti Magatse, Tabani Mlilo, and Alex Mochwanetsi. And we also have our research stream leader here, Dr. Rowan Koch, who is also, thank you our team for being here. So I'd like to now play the video from the video address from Archbishop Thabo Makoba. He couldn't be here in person, he's in New York at present.
My name is Archbishop Thabo Makoba of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa and a member of the V20 chapter in South Africa. It is inherent to our humanity that people of every religion and none all live by certain values. Each of us wants to flourish as a human being, and we can truly flourish only if we live monastically in community. For me, the highest value we can all aspire to work to is for the common good of all people and for the environment which sustains all of life. Inherent in working for the common good is respecting the dignity of others and actively working to ensure that all have the same opportunities so that everyone can flourish equally. That means each of us should identify at least one activity to engage in which benefits others who are in greater need than we are. A further example to underscore that value of working for the common good. The maxim that enough is enough to characterize our behavior. So it will root out greed and corruption of people whose attitude is, I want it now and I want it for me. And the whole attitude is I. So the value of the community stresses the importance of we. It places also the onus on taking self or personal responsibility in our decisions for serving good or the common good is also the good of each.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite the panel to come up, please. Mr. Mashishi, Mr. Roger Latchman, my co-chair, Tabea Tshesane, and Irfaan, Mangera. While they're coming up, I just want to echo, something that Arch Tabea was saying. And this resonates with our values of agency. It's a wonderful problem when the venue is not big enough for all the people that want to join in the conversation. It's a wonderful problem to have. There are some more chairs on that side, if anybody, so if maybe when people come in, we can also direct them to that side, please, if they're looking for a chair. So as I was saying earlier, I would like to just echo what Archbishop Thabo Makgoba was saying to us about agency. Because primarily, so one of our key values is agency and accountability. And what this means is we ask the question, who am I being in all the conversations we go about? This is not about saying, government, what are you doing for me? Community, what are you doing for me? Agency is the question, who am I being and what am I doing to create a different reality for myself? So that's value one, outlined by Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. We now have a panel discussion, and I'm going to start off. Prof, I'm not sure if you want to join the panel. You can speak on values-based leadership. That's an emphatic no from Prof, but we'll draw on him. So I'd like to start, and firstly, thank you panelists for being here, and thank you for your leadership. Roger Latchman there as well as one of our shepherds. Thank you, Roger, for being here. Irfaan, thank you so much for being here. So starting, Mos, can we start with you, with your permission? Mos is going to, so what we've done is, Tabea and I crafted questions that focus on highlighting our values, the values that we've chosen. And I will start off by asking a few questions, and then I'll create some space for you to ask your questions as well. Does that sound okay? Okay. So, Mos, starting with you, in which ways do you think Ubuntu can be activated to address South Africa's socio-economic challenges? No, it's not on.
Morning, convener, morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the heart of Ubuntu as a philosophy, as we know, is in its simplest iteration, is that I am because you are. So underpinning that philosophy is the core of interdependence, that we are interdependent. That my success is empty if it's not translated to a collective success. So in South Africa, I think Professor Mohale has spoken very well in terms of the imbalance that depicts our society today. So the first value in Ubuntu is how do we reset that pattern, that our growth and development is one for collective, for all, instead of the society that we see today that is so completely imbalanced. So I think, Chair, to you, we can achieve greatly if we embrace a philosophy of collectivism instead of individualism as the heart of it, but also as South Africa hosting the G20, how do we locate Ubuntu in a global context? And maybe we can address that as part of our conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Moss. We'll come back to that. Irfaan, can I move to you? So what does dignity mean for you?
Firstly, thank you and a warm welcome to everyone for being here. I am Irfaan Mangera and I'm from We the People, South Africa. So Prof, it was good that you mentioned those words because that's how we live our work and put to practice the values that we speak about in this very constitution. I can speak about many options, many stories, particularly being at this important venue on the Hill. I've recently joined We the People, but it feels like a spiritual space when I come to work every single time, because these values I experience every time you walk through these corridors. So before I continue, when we complete with this session today, I urge every single one of you to please walk around, engage the space a bit more so that we leave here fully reflective of both the pain and the promise that this space holds for all of us. Now, what does dignity mean to me? I come from a family who were forcibly removed under apartheid and spatial injustice laws from a place not so far from here called Vredendorp to Lenasia. My family's house was bulldozed, and that sense of indignity really stripped them of something. And it's a reminder for me as a young person on where we come from and where we need to be going to. I wear many hats, but in particularly this context, dignity is not just a concept, it is a demand, particularly for us as young people who are saying something has to give. Our humanity should mean more than people's profits, more than the privileges people have and are unwilling to let go of. Often that is the unemployed youth, the protester demanding dignity for having access to water, or the informal trader. It's ensuring that every single person, not just in this country, but in the world over, because dignity is a human experience. It's not just solely within this context of South Africa, but we know how it's constantly being stripped from us. Again, it is the freedom, the resources, and the respect to live lives that they value without fear or without discrimination. For me, it is a fundamental constitutional value, which is why we carry this book around with us, because it is something that people have sacrificed and given their lives for, and it's something that's meant to protect the most vulnerable. And like the previous speaker, Prof, said, this is our protection. This is something that we, the people, should use to actually enforce the values that we speak about. And so to end off, in essence, dignity should be about honoring every single life that exists in South Africa and ensuring, regardless of people's race, gender, sexuality, religion, people are respected at a very base point. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfaan. Roger, how do you see values influencing governance, whether in public, private, or civic sectors?
Thank you, Preeya. Good morning to all the entire audience here, to the leadership. And it's quite an important and crucial question at this juncture. I think in fact, this question should have been asked 31 years ago when we came upon the dawn of democracy. Because what we've seen over the years is that our values have diminished, have we? Because if we now looking at I think it just down the road here was the commission that went on for years to determine the capture of our state. If we had values in our system, and not only within the system, but within ourselves, for those that were those perpetrators that didn't just do what they needed to do for livelihood, but for greed, then this country would have been a far better place than it is right now. As Professor Bonang mentioned, we have huge number of women especially, but the unemployment rate is at levels that were unprecedented. Yet we have a youthful, a country full of youth that are able to work. We have women that are able to work, but the opportunities for them are not there. How do we change that? Within the society that we live, with values at the levels that it is, it's just shocking that not only did those perpetrators just smile and get away with it, they came, they gave their testimony, but what have we done? How many of them should be in a place where they should be, and that's probably in the prisons? But how many of them have actually gone to court to to actually determine the cause of the system, and the system that we continuously use every day for our livelihoods? Ordinary people are denied opportunities, are denied even to open a bank account if they have a small dot on their name. Yet we allow people who have stolen trillions from overseas to come and buy properties in our country. Where is the values? And how do we determine those values? And I think what we need to do through the Values 20 is we need to really unpack and re-examine ourselves. And I think the legislators need to also come to the party and understand what are we trying to achieve and what is the values that we should be having in a country that is so richly endowed with minerals and with assets that should be beneficial to our communities, and yet they're not seeing any of it. Thank you.
So my name is Tshesane, and I'm a fighter for equality and equity. And if I can start by saying that this is the place where the equity and equality that we are supposed to be enjoying was fought for. In this very venue, where people who gave up their lives so that I in particular, could be sitting here. And in response to your question, Preeya, about systemic changes, my first start would be to talk to the quality of education in our country, to talk about the disparity that exists between the haves and the have-nots in terms of equity. You see, if we were to say that it's all about equality, we would be saying to everyone, go and get your education. The playing fields are leveled. But the truth is that they're not. And therefore, we need equity. We need to ensure that we remove every single barrier for people that have been marginalized from getting the best out of the education system. Currently, our education system is one that still leaves marginalized people, specifically Black people, on their back foot. So systemically, we need to remove every single barrier that stands in the way of every Black person, every woman, every person from a designated group, from accessing the quality of education that would enable them to be the best version of themselves. We need to remove the price that is attached to education and how accessibility is determined by the money in your pocket. When we know that actually the money that is in the pocket, to a large extent, has been not accessible to those to whom it should have been accessible for them to get what they could, to get the best education. Systemically, we should also be looking at health, at areas where health, like the Prof spoke, is inaccessible to the majority of the people in our country. I could go on and speak about the inequality in the workplace and talk about concepts such as social capital, where some people walk from matric even or from a degree straight into a job when my helper's child does not have access to it. My helper does not know any manager or any person in a position of power such that she would be able to say, please give my child a job. We need to remove barriers and systemic barriers that keep the privileged, even in the workplace. And then go on further to ensure that the workplace is a place where everybody can walk in and say, this place feels like home. I feel valued, there is inclusivity, and I feel a part of the bigger mission of this organization.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think perhaps to locate that question, I think we're all aware that the G20 is taking place in a particular juncture and a particular moment in the world today. We are in the midst of probably one of the biggest seismic state of flux in the world. The world order that we've known up to now is upended as we speak. So we know there is movement and there's change. What we don't know is how it's going to pan out into the future. So there is a moment of risk in that, risk in the unknown, but there's also a moment of opportunity because we are afforded this privilege of hosting the G20 at this very juncture. Now, Ubuntu as a value system is a value system that we have opportunity to universalize, to contribute in the debate about a new world order. and help perhaps contribute to humanity in defining a new value system underpinned by the concept of Ubuntu. When you look at the literature on Ubuntu, there are those who argue that Ubuntu is intrinsically an African philosophy that is not readily exportable without dilution. I don't want to get into that debate. Safe to say, I don't agree with that perspective. I believe that Ubuntu is a concept that can be globally set and inform a new world order in terms of value systems. And perhaps we can unpack on specific areas of how that can happen. But for instance, in the issue of economic justice and inclusive development, if a world order is defined in the concept of Ubuntu, I am because you are, the G20 and the World Committee will find it easier to align with this SDGs, for instance, as a program, a world program. If you look at Ubuntu as a framework for global cooperation, a global cooperation infused by a philosophy of I am because you are, will have a different slant to what we've had up to now. It will be a world order that is critical of hyper capitalism that is based on a zero-sum approach on issues of trade, issues of climate, issues of debt. To the contrary, it will be a world order that is more accepting of advocacy for fairness in multilateralism and in social development. So there are other areas that we can look at that would, with an Ubuntu-infused global philosophy, we have a total different take on equity and justice in the world. Thanks.
It is the most fundamental and foundational role. But before that, let me say and perhaps share a story. Mama Winnie Mandela was jailed at this prison, and she refused to follow an order in which Black prisoners were forced to crawl across the atrium just a couple of meters away. She refused and was put into solitary confinement because that was indignified to her. Coming out of solitary confinement, she did it again and again and again until other prisoners around her, because this was a mixed prison, white, Black prisoners, women prisoners were here. But the white prisoners could walk across the atrium. Black prisoners had to crawl as if they were cleaning. And more prisoners started following her in doing this because that was an indignified belief and an indignified an act that was forced on them. And when so many prisoners started joining her, solitary confinement became unsustainable because now you have an entire group of people doesn't serve its purpose anymore. And eventually they had to scrap that policy. Policies are shifted by people who resist and people who refuse to accept that indignity should be a norm. And so that example is one of many that I think we can account for, in which the Global South and people who have who want a dignified life, who want to live in a space and community of Ubuntu believe in. And so that's why I say it's foundational, because if our law is to be enforced, we would have a dignified society. And so when we think about policy creation and building inclusive and just systems, we have to constantly ask ourselves, who is this serving? Who is being left behind? To whose interest does this benefit? And at all times, what support is needed to help those who are most vulnerable to achieve their full success? Systems are designed by us as people. And so we can't assume that this is just naturally made. The same way Madiba and others said, apartheid is a system that must be ended. this was the result of that, a constitution that protects against that kind of indignity. And I want to conclude by saying a dignity-centered system listens actively, includes and uplifts, especially those on the margins. And this quote from former President Mandela speaks to it because it's a reminder to all of us about what is our role in shaping these systems. And the quote goes, "Our drive for human dignity and basic rights is premised on the development of our country and the improvement of the living conditions of the people. The freedoms whose virtue we are extolling today will be meaningless in the face of grinding poverty and underdevelopment." On the 20th of March, 1996. If 31 years later, we are still grappling with this fact that the system we've inherited and tried to redesign is not grappled and not geared up for this moment, what are we saying needs to happen differently? Are we advocating for the policy shifts necessary to start addressing those particular problems? Thank you.
So G20 is made up of countries that are extremely influential, that are making decisions around very serious matters around the economy, how decisions are made by leaders, and these decisions will also be made in this platform of G20. So if you look at equity, you're looking at saying we are a diverse group of people who are all starting at a different point. And that draws even to country level. So we have leaders that are leading different countries which have different dynamics and different levels of equality. So in terms of equity, G20 needs to keep in mind in terms of the value of equity that we're not all starting at the same point and that our needs are different. And how we engage in decision-making should not be ignorant to the realities of the people that are having these decisions being made for them. It needs to be cognizant of the different needs and incorporate in that how resources need to be allocated, how resources need to be shared, and to ensure that the decisions that they make, they can walk away saying, we made decisions that are good for everybody and not for some people. You see, the difference with equality is equality says the playing field is level. But the reality is that as the G20 leaders sit there, the playing field is not equal. And we have to consider how we ensure that we all get our place in the sun, given the barriers that exist.
Thank you. And it's enlightening listening to everybody. I've been doing some very interesting work on values, and I want to check. I find that many times when we talk about values, we talk about them at a very abstract and construct level. What is the plan as we work in building, as Prof. Mohale was saying, about the next 31 years? What is the plan around turning them into behaviors we actually measure and manage continuously? Is it even possible?
Thank you so much. My name is Sandile Chavalala, and I'm a co-founder of Huruma Bandhu, a philanthropy corporate business. I just want to quickly find out, as far as I know, G20 is a global grouping. And I think what I'm hearing today is a lot of local or domestic issues that are being addressed. And I'd just like to know, how is V20 South Africa looking to influence the global situation of values, and how can we use our own South African story to share, how we've perhaps been successful in changing certain scenarios, but also how we failed to succeed in certain constitutional, rights or certain situations. So I think just from the panelists, anyone who may just want to share, what are we actually giving the world in terms of values, and how are we packaging that story? That's my first input. And then the other one has to do with how. Hope so. The other one is also at the same time is also, how are we proactively going to learn from other countries? Because I think it's very important to recognize that South Africa cannot get where it wants to be without also looking how the world is using its different values to get there. A good example is the notion of secular ethics, where other countries, they don't try to dominate values. They try to make sure that different religions, different cultures have a secular ability to influence the state. So in other words, there's no dominance of any kind of value. So I'd just like to know what are we first giving to the world in terms of our values, but also what are we looking to get from the world in terms of learning from the group of 20. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this fantastic panel discussion and for this meeting. My name is Dr. Bettina Boabing-Bedu, and I'm the Co-Executive Director of the International Working Group for Health System Strengthening. And I've been so kindly invited by our two co-chairs to work with the V20 on the health equity section of the Values 20 communique. And I would like to just, draw on the sentiments that Mr. Mashishi shared about the importance of Ubuntu now. I think in global health, we are seeing the biggest deterioration of global solidarity that we've seen in a lifetime. The withdrawing of PEPFAR funding in South Africa, the withdrawing of USAID. I think now more than ever is the time for Ubuntu to be really solidified as a reason for global health solidarity. I think in the past, the reason for global health solidarity has been based on this idea that diseases cross borders, which is true, but many diseases do not cross borders. Mental health does not cross borders. NCDs often do not cross borders. So what do we do about conditions like heart conditions that do not have that kind of same intimate? So I think my question then is twofold. So firstly, what can we really do to practically embody Ubuntu in global solidarity? What are the barriers that we are seeing in making this a real vision for global solidarity in the world? And secondly, how do we go about in the practical way that we align ourselves to different institutions? So how do we as an institution already start to embody Ubuntu now to create a platform for it to become one in which we can organize our world around? Thank you so much.
So Preeya, maybe I should start by responding to the question around how we're inputting into G20 and how we're giving, given that to a large extent our context and our discussion has been very local. So our mandate as V20 is twofold. One, it's to produce a communique that goes to G20 and that positions values as being central to the discussions in G20. To say to them, as you do this work, consider this, consider these values in the decisions that you make. So our mandate is to therefore to produce this document. There's a lot of research that is going on in the background. Ruan is here as one of the research stream leaders. And they're producing a document that can go to G20 that addresses values in line with the three themes that are the G20 values: solidarity, sustainable development, and equality. So that's how we'll inform G20. That's the impact that we give to G20, contextualizing values within the debates that will happen within G20. Our second mandate then is, how do we realize these values locally and in as far as we can internationally? We have a community that works with us. So V20 has a founding group that is based on the different countries where V20 has participated. And through them, we'll have engagements even internationally. But one of our biggest focus, given a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about here, is how do we impact ethical leadership in our country? How do we ensure that in every sector, leaders are making decisions and governing in their roles based on values? So our project is not just going to end when G20 ends. Our project is a 3-year project, and it has a strong advocacy side to it, which will ensure that at the end of the day, we embody values in our society, that we begin to prioritize values over profits, over being first. And that's where we're going. So I hope I've answered that first question that you've raised, and I'll allow my other panelists to respond to others, and I'll circle back if there's anything else.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the gentleman over there on that side and say that I fully agree with your analysis. By way of example, you'll recall that in 2002, South Africa hosted the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And what preceded WSSD was Stockholm, a summit which followed by Rio, and then WSSD. And with Stockholm and Rio, by and large, the focus was on the environment and environmental protection. When it arrived in South Africa, we took a different slant. And the theme in South Africa was people, planet, and prosperity, and introduced the notion of people and central to the concept of overall sustainability. And today we're talking about a just transition, which has its seeds in the South Africa, in WSSD, from the concept of bringing people into the center of talking about global and environmental sustainability. So I am absolutely of the view that the moment we are in the world today affords South Africa a unique opportunity to contribute in the resetting that is taking place in the world in terms of global value system, because the old value system is being upended as we speak. What is going to take its place? And we have this unique opportunity of G20 in South Africa in the context of this global environment. So if we take Ubuntu as an underpinning philosophy, and we come out of the G20, having made a contribution in that regard, that would be a legacy contribution of South Africa in the world as it will be going forward, as opposed to how it was up to now. Thank you.
We must recognize that South Africa is now the 4th country consecutively from the developing countries or global south that is now hosting the G20. We then hand over to the US next year. It's at a crucial juncture that what we develop in our papers for the Values 20 is important in terms of what is happening and what is being, the messages that we are getting from the US and how it impacts the global community from a trade perspective. But not only that, because once we affect the issues of economics, you're going to start affecting everything else that follows down there. So as we develop our communique and papers that surround it, we need to ensure that values of Ubuntu, the values of ethics, but more importantly of accountability needs to be highlighted so that we can be assured that in this 5th successive year of the Values 20, that we produce a document that will withstand the effects that may or may not be carried forward from next year onwards.
I don't know which one to answer because it's but the panelists have covered a few. And so the last point was around how do we organize our world around solidarity? As a young activist, I can relate from experience. Solidarity for me has never just been this word of used in glossy terms. The art of solidarity is showing up intently and purposefully. So when your partner organization or your friend or family member has something going on, it's showing up for them in that moment, because it's in the good times, but also in the bad times that you are present and you're engaged. The same way the world, like you're saying, global South country, global South country, global South country, and potentially next year going to the USA. How do we show up for each other in this moment of crisis? And what are the values that underpin that? Because in a moment of flux, of great turbulence, it's grounding yourself in a commonality that keeps you firm, that keeps you binded to your partners, your friends, your family. And so that's, for me, is organizing ourselves in a world and rooted in solidarity. Particularly being here for me is one of those things, because I also serve as the PR officer on the Y20, which will be launched on Thursday. And that's the connection between all of us, so that we don't operate in vacuums when we engage in these briefs that are being sent to the G20 leaders. Because the G20 leaders will sit around the table and engage at a very high level. We'll hear the technical speak, but at a people-to-people relational level, how are we organizing and engaging the various communities around the world who form part of this G20? I want to also add that SA's story to the world is fascinating, because for many years, at least as a young person, I'm just 28, growing up and watching politics, watching the world shape itself, I've seen South Africa able to influence on many decision-making tables because of the moral authority it comes with, and this ability of having transition from apartheid into a constitutional democracy without a violent conflict unfolding. Yes, there was a lot of bloodshed, there was a lot of torment and torture, but it's that reality and recognition that we were able to do the transition without thousands and thousands of people being killed. And that's a reality that I think we must play up. We must engage on how do we export that? When we've already done so in many negotiations across the continent, across parts of Europe, we've been part of discussions in which we were able to shape and influence that story using the values that we stand for. And I think the most recent being supporting human rights at a global stage within the International Court of Justice. And with that said, I think it's about the first question was, how do we practicalize these values? Because shaping behavior is very tough. It takes decades and probably generations to really reshape values. And one of the people that I've been really heartsore of having lost in the last 2 weeks was Pope Francis, who lived that values very confidently and very boldly. And just yesterday found out that in one of his last acts was to make sure that the Pope vehicle that was used was donated to the kids of Gaza as a vehicle for healthcare benefit. And so there's a very practical way of your values being used in real time, in real life.
If I can just come in, thank you. And just add to what Irfaan has said about how do we make these values move from, the concept of values, move from being a very philosophical concept to being a lived thing. I think one of the things that we do as V20 is we need to define the behavior that is aligned to the values. So if we say equity, what does equity look like in the workplace? How will a person say, I feel I am valued? I feel like there is a place here for me, and that's behavior. So it's transcending from a concept to defining very specific behaviors that translate into action, that when people look at it, they say, this looks like equity. So part of our mandate is really translating these concepts that are in the air into behavior that can be lived and to demonstrate what it looks like. Thank you.
So just two things I want to highlight is that values are driven on a conscious and unconscious level. And so we might say we are values aligned. And so scholars call this, we are espousing. We are values aligned, but from our behavior perspective, we are not. And so one of the first journeys with values is the consciousness that all of us need to start with, is who am I? Who am I being? So number one is that sense of self-awareness. That I'm not just talking about values, I'm actually able to live them. And to your question, sir, about how do we make impactful change, yes, we are going to, our research communique, very solid. We have a strong academic process involved, rigorous academic process involved, I should rather say. But the advocacy work is where the rubber hits the road from a South African perspective. And from a global perspective. When Tabea and I were in a meeting with our global leaders last week, we were explaining to them the nuances of the South African situation. And they were astounded by the scale of inequality that exists in this country. When we talk about what's happening in the world and how can we translate their findings to us and our findings to them, there isn't a neat overlap because the injustice isn't linear. So we need to be, we accept the communiques. We've read them, we've processed them. They're already included in the first chapter of our own communique, the global V20 recommendations. But we need to consider that our context is very unique. And this conversation is very complex because we say we are having the right conversation, but we don't support it with the right behavior. So there's that misalignment, which really needs to be said and stated. Another very important point is that in order for us to get to the point of embodied change, it starts with the conversation of awareness, of dialogue. So we can't say eventually we want to be in a society that embodies values. We have to really start with saying, what are values? What do they mean to me? What do they mean to you? What do they mean in organization spaces? What do they mean in communities? What don't they mean? And, when I said earlier that we want to be sure that we are not standing and giving, saying, this is a moral platform, join this bandwagon, because that momentum won't last. Behavior change is when people buy in and, as Alex was saying to me the other day, they need to put skin in the game. When all of us understand what are my values, that's when we start to impact change. And that only happens with this first stage of awareness. So we have a longer term project. Year one is let's have dialogue and conversation around values on a human level, on a community level, on an organizational level, so that we can start to create meaningful shifts that are not just
Morning, everyone. My name is Ntshangase, and my question is for Mr. Mashishi. It's around Ubuntu, but I just want to preface it with saying, you know, growing up, my father used to always tell me stories about how he grew up in rural KZN, where they had communal land and they lived off of the land. No one really owned it, but they were able to really create a sustainable ecosystem for themselves. And then when you get to university, you learn about, there's one lady that stuck to mind when I got there, Elinor Ostrom, I think it is, who wrote about the tragedy of commons and won Nobel Prize in economics in 2009. And one of the pillars of reaching the tragedy of commons, where individuals act in their own self-interest that then causes its detriment to the community, is individual privatization and ownership. Where, and this is something that strongly is protected by Western culture, where ownership by one person gives everyone else nothing to lose. And Prof spoke briefly about then what happened in July 2021, which is caused by that, when people have nothing to lose. And so I guess my question to you is, to put it simply, can we have Ubuntu in a Western culture? Can we have Ubuntu when we are governed by Western rules?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rose. Firstly, let me just say a couple of things to say. First thing, I am so grateful to see so many young faces here, because we will never create a legacy of ongoing values alignment and values embodiment if we do not do this across generations. So thank you to you for being here. I'm Rose. I founded a business called Abundance at Work, and it says everything. It is about abundance hard at work, and it's also about creating abundance in our workplaces. So I think that V20 is my spiritual home. I'm saddened by the fact that we call it V20 because it's associated with the G20. I wish we would call it V all, because I think values is for all. But I'm also very, very grateful that we are calling it V20 because we have to influence the G20. And I want to speak to the point of influence. We will talk about values, as you said, Preeya, for many, many years to come. Ubuntu lives here, not because we've just made it up, but because it survived all of us for so many years, because it lives within our communities. But this year is the G20 year. And this year is the year where we understand fundamentally that we will never have freedom if we think that political freedom gives us freedom. We will have freedom when political freedom is accompanied by economic freedom. And that is why V20, as associated or running at the same time as G20, means that it is the time to talk about economic freedom. The second thing I want to say is we are not a country of victims. We are a country of victors. Walk around this place and you will not find victims. You will find people that have overcome in the most harshest of circumstances. So exactly what Prof said right at the beginning as our Sherpa. If this is our land, and I am not talking about South Africa, I'm talking about the earth. If this is our land, where are our stories? And I'm hoping that through this initiative, because this is why my My business is up there. This is why I want to be. I wondered, where would I fit? Am I in the B20? How do I contribute as a South African to the G20? This is the place for me. It's my spiritual home. But it's only going to be my spiritual home if I'm going to use this year to talk about economic freedom. And if I'm going to use this year to tell the stories of how our people are already moving from extraction to regeneration. So I'm going to ask all of us here, please, please do not treat our people like they are victims. Tell the stories of Ubuntu that happens in our communities every single day. And let those be the stories that change the economic order, so that when we hand over to places like the US, that the G20 is actually a VO. Thank you. That's what I want to leave with.
I know I've been like waving up my hand furiously because I'm so keen to speak to you. My name is Senamile Zungu. I run a podcast on race and privilege called Colorful, a top charting one, which is really good. We use personal stories as a vehicle to inspire action. And I also, in my day job, work as a commercial lead for a really large research and data analytics agency. And I spend a lot of time analyzing Gen Z and trying to understand their psyche. So what I wanted to ask the panel is, Gen Zs are so impassioned for change. They're a different kind of breed. How are you making space to have intergenerational discussions? Because right now, the issues facing our youth, South African youth, are so nuanced. Let's not even get into the unemployment. But what I found is that there's an anger and a despondency there and a mistrust of institutions. And that filters down to traditional institutions. And what scares me is even a mistrust in constitutionalism and how that served them. How are we making space to not speak down and be patronizing to them, telling them they're the leaders of tomorrow when they really believe they're the leaders now? And how are we making space for intergenerational discussions and holding space for the fact that they're just a little bit, they're their own kids. I'm a 2000, speaking as a Gen Z myself. So thank you.
Last question. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I think there's been some interesting points that have been laid, and I appreciate everyone who's come here to impart knowledge with us, to us. I come from a company called Light Tech. I'm a founder of a platform called Out of Home Marketplace, where we have basically created market access for small and medium enterprises in the advertising space. I think I probably have more of a statement rather than a question. And I do apologize. I'm not a very learned person like everyone here. I think market access is probably one of the most interesting challenges that we have across the world. We can't refute the fact that small businesses are what drives our economy. And maybe my statement would be, when we talk about values and when we talk about market access, do we have the correct mechanisms to fund these ideals? Do we have platforms where people like us can either put our money into it and say, listen, I believe in value systems, and I believe in the research and the activities and activists like this gentleman here. How do we fund that as businesses? Doesn't really matter how big we are or how small we are. How can we as business contribute to these values? Because one of the fateful things that I experience on a regular basis is that the industries that we are penetrating as Black people are so locked and they're very difficult to penetrate because we have a history of segregation. And my question would be then, how does market access basically create a value ecosystem for SMMEs? How can we make it more profitable for people to accept values like Ubuntu and so forth and so forth? Thank you, guys.
So I'll just take a shot at some of the questions. There was a question around how do we embody Ubuntu, for example, in a Western culture, especially in business. So I often talk to people and I tell them that I'm a conscious capitalist, right? And if you know of the Tata Group is based on conscious capitalism. And some of the work that they've done, and I'll share very quickly a story of the Taj when it was on fire because of terrorists that came in and held people at ransom that were in the hotel. And the response of the Rattan family who own the Tata Group and how they dealt with it. So the CEO, it was a 7-day ordeal, if I'm not mistaken. And for those 7 days, he sat at the pavement. He was the person who was giving commentary of what was happening. He was the person who was giving the answers to the questions that were being asked. The way in which he dealt with that crisis was based on the principles that we call Ubuntu in our country. So to share some of the things that he did, he lost, I think, 26 staff members that were inside. They were killed by the terrorists with some of the people, the guests that were in the hotel. When the ordeal was over, he met with every single staff member's family that were involved in the ordeal. Not only did he do that, those who lost their lives, he said, I will pay the salaries of your breadwinners for as long as they would have reached their retirement age. So the families were able to gainfully earn a living when the people that would have given them the money to survive had passed away. That's, for me, is the way in which one espouses Ubuntu in a Western culture. They are not mutually exclusive. It is how I run my company. It is what I do inside my company. It is the recognition, for example, that everybody is somebody's child. And how I treat them should be value-based. I should demonstrate care. I should make sure that everybody feels there's a place. And that I'm not that leader that is so high up that they cannot come and correct. That they will have the space that somebody who is in the lowest occupational level in my organization should be able to sit with me and to say to me, I don't agree with you. Because I am, because she is. If I sit in my organization and I say I'm the founder and the M&D, I should remember that I am, because she is. So for me, that's how we espouse. Let me give over to others.
I think the example that Tabea just mentioned, those, we can't put this as into a box and say these are Western ideologies and this isn't a South African ideology or whatever. It's individual choices. And like the example that Tabea gave of Mr. Ratan Tata, it's an individual's actions and based upon his behavior and upon his upbringing and various other, and based upon his values. I think that is the important thing, is that based is the, and there are many other examples of humanity, caring, sharing, etc. But I think the evil that surrounds us overshadows that in the media. So like most of you have never heard of the story about what happened in Mumbai during the time of that riots, the terrorist attack. But I think there are stories that should be told so that it heightens the awareness of things that can be done by those in leadership, because it's through those stories being shared that we would be able to know, wait a minute, this can be done. I mean, I shouldn't be sitting, in the corner office and not worrying about my cleaner. So I think when we start sharing those kind of stories, the values within ourselves and the values that espouse a company come out from people, because a company is established, there's nothing in it if there's no people, and people matter. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I just coming back to the question that you raised. Perhaps one should start by saying that culture is a function of history and environment. Culture evolves and culture is contested. It's a contested terrain. In that context, the question of leadership becomes critical. If you take example, those who observe other countries, what is happening in Burkina Faso now, I mean, in a question of 2 years, the leadership in that country has fundamentally impacted the lives of Burkina Faso people in very profound ways. And starting from military background where people thought this is another dictatorship in the making, but it has turned out to be a totally different outcome. So if you look at Rwanda, of course, Rwanda, there are issues about the lakes, Great Lakes area and what it does or doesn't do. But if you land in Rwanda today, and you remember that in 1994, in April, when we were voting in South Africa, they were in the middle of a genocide. 800,000 people were killed in that genocide. But if you land in Rwanda today, it's a totally different world. The same period as ourselves, when we were stepping out of apartheid, they were in genocide. So they're 31 years. And you look at what what leadership has done in transforming society there, it raised the question that Professor Mohale was raising about what has been our lived experience in South Africa. So yes, the Ubuntu is a philosophy that is about I am because you are, and that has informed our communities over the years. But the fact that we can, if I ask 3 people in this room, what is South African culture, we'll get 3 different answers. Okay, so that is what I mean, that it is in a state of its own evolution, but it's a function of leadership that we find ourselves where we are. Because I said that if we had a different approach as in South Africa from a leadership perspective, we may be in a different point in terms of what is the dominant culture, whether we should be even talking about Western culture as a dominant culture in South Africa today. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. If I can just also come back and talk to the issue of generational gaps. I think Gen Z is preoccupied with purpose. I think to a large extent, they want to be involved in activities that are purpose-driven. And if you look at how we should look at the work that we do, we should always define the purpose in order to make it relevant for them. So if you go to the workplace, it's important to explain why we do what we do. What is the purpose of this organization? And we begin to talk about purpose beyond profit. And I always say that in the work that we do, in a conscious capitalist environment, we should look for solutions to the problems of people and the environment. That should be our purpose. And with that comes the profit. Because businesses will tell you that they're in it for profit, right? But the businesses that are sustainable and can be sustained are those that work for purpose. So your generation is challenging us to move away from using people to drive profits, to saying, how do I come to work? And there's purpose in that which I do. And I think that's how we should be responding to.
I think my response will touch on probably three of the questions or inputs. And I want to start by saying dignity is about building power for yourself and for your communities, and not about pity. And I find that, excuse me, in South African context, and I spoke earlier about wearing different hats, all the hats that I've had, whether in governance or social justice organizations, civil society, well, very recently as a small business, there's a sense of powerlessness that we don't know what to do. We confuse, there's disillusionment, and we've allowed that to set in. And instead of saying, what is the inherent power that's within? Bhikkhu speaks about this. Many other scholars and activists and leaders of that generation were highly influential because of the ideas and the recognition that they had inherent power to change things. They didn't fall back into this sense of hopelessness and helplessness. And I think for us, the blueprint is here. Is this book that it contains so many different clauses that help us define how we should fight the battle and the frontiers that are ahead of us. And I say this because any of the generation before us, and I'm speaking as a young person, will tell you that it was quite clear during apartheid that there was this one clear vision that we needed to break down the system. There was a clear enemy. Today, our enemies are multifold. There's so many systems, there's so many laws and potentially issues that are existing in society, and they're multi-layered. You can speak on drugs, you can speak on alcoholism, you can go to unemployment, hunger. Those are things that are all affecting us. But on which front do we fight? And that's why people have the sense of disillusionment. And I think it's reminding ourselves that we have this power within us. We have a constitutional democracy that can protect us, and if we fight that fight. And many have won. Somebody spoke about health justice earlier. The Treatment Action Campaign was a mass-based, people's organized collective that fought for the rights of people who had HIV in a time when it wasn't unfashionable to speak about it, when officials were saying, no, we don't want that. How did they do it? They used this as a base point to say, we premise human dignity. We premise the value that all lives matter, and we're going to fight for that. And so we use that system towards fighting for a better future for those people. Today that, yes, you're right, there's reversals around it. How do we reorganize and reorientate ourselves towards it? And the example you gave of the death of the commons is fascinating, because I've seen that also from a family that has multi-layered, multi-religious and race-based. You were able to see this beauty in diversity. But unfortunately, the spatial injustice has forced us into our cocoons, and we still haven't addressed that kind of structural barriers that are allowing the commons to deplete itself. It was just recently in one of my projects where we got young people to understand the Constitution, understand the rights they have, to recognize one of the things in their community was hunger, and people were hungry. It's an informal settlement in Johannesburg. And then part of that problem was recognizing the climate crisis and saying, okay, how do we deal with both of these issues? And there was a patch of land in the community that was dumped. It was lots of potential risks, health risks, etc. We did cleanup campaigns, but part of that campaign was to say, with the recognition that this must become a food garden. And today there's a food garden that's thriving, that's helping feed that community. But how do we access the kind of support we need? How do we recognize the power we have to actually mobilize and organize to achieve that. I think inadvertently so, it's the human spirit that must thrive. It must triumph in adversity. And we've had those examples from Robben Island to Constitution Hill. And we have to understand to build commons takes sacrifice. And many in this room will agree that it's hard to let go of some of the privileges you have. But what sacrifice do you make? Is it that extra money you're spending on coffee, couple of thousand a month, to be honest? If you're a professional and you're buying a coffee every day or two times a day, that amounts to a couple of thousand of rand, which can actually benefit a community garden that can feed a couple of hundred people. So it's rethinking how we practice our values. On the side, and the last point on intergenerational dialogue and discussions, and I've been in many of them. It's many discussions, and it in some ways it's good because people see each other, they understand where we come from. But tangibly, we haven't really seen it translate into something of substance. And I'm on the border of the Gen Z, so I understand a little bit, but I also get very confused sometimes at what's happening. But it reminds me that I constantly have to learn. I constantly have to adjust, because that's a generation that is, they're unbothered by the past. They are saying, we're going to rewrite this thing for ourselves. And part of my work now is to make sure that they understand that this constitution that gives them the power to act, and they can do so because of the sacrifices made from people before them. And one of the challenges, and next month, in fact, we'll celebrate 30 years of the Concord. And there's a competition that will go out this week to get young people involved, to say, here's an opportunity for you to link the Constitution to live realities that you're speaking about. And part of the exhibition that we're going to launch is one that also showcases the laws that were in apartheid days, that young people can see, oh, wait, you couldn't kiss who you wanted to back then, or you couldn't love where you wanted to back then. And those are things that we take for granted as young people. And so it's about challenging those ideas and behaviors. So when the mistrust of constitutionalism came up, it's deeply felt, and that's why organizations like We the People exist, is because we want to showcase that there's power in our collective. And to just end on a side note, as an activist, I've always struggled with the question on money and resources, but it's the ability to connect and network in spaces like this with people like myself. There's many organizations who've raised their hands. For example, Uncle Cass, who's here, supported a youth development project to get young people together for the last couple of years under the National Youth Coalition. It was just us going to them and saying, this is what we have in mind, can you assist? And I think in the same breath, particularly young business people, have to recognize who are the peers, who are the leaders and activists we need to support, because that's the generation of Madiba and others who had that kind of network. Today, we're not seeing as much of that kind of synergy. So I'm hoping we can continue building on that soon. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your contribution. Time that we bring the session to a close, but please give me just a few more minutes for a vote of thanks. I want to add, before I go into the vote of thanks, see a Scan Me icon. That Scan Me icon is a QR code that connects you to our Values 20 pack, which includes the values that we are using, not to define values, but as conversation starters. To start, and in some cases, commence the values dialogue you have already started. To our dynamic lady over there, the question that you said, what are our Values 20 going to do? How are you going to create the space? Here's the space. We create the invitation for South African and our global community to have conversation on values, to create values conversation, to create values dialogue. Take this viral. If we want to get to the point of embodied change, let values be the new news. And through that, we will create the shifts that are meant to happen. A new generation with your centeredness in purpose, that is a very exciting prospect. As we bring the session to a close, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all who have made today possible, starting with our venue sponsor, We the People Trust. There couldn't be a more apt place for us to start this fabulous conversation. We are really honored to be able to gather here as we reflect on our historical indignity, injustices, and now invite change in that space. To our other partners, Henley Business School, thank you for your contribution. Achievement Awards Group, EmpowerWorks, who have hosted the PR of this event, thank you for your holding. To our V20 global team, to our over 60 dedicated volunteers, to our international V20 colleagues, to my co-chair, Tabea, to our Sherpa, Prof. Bonang Mohale, to our incredible panelists, and to you, our guests. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for being the early adopters. Thank you for the people that are going to spread this and take this viral. I want to end by saying that we have not a message of division, but a message of unity. Values is not a conversation for the privileged, for the rich, or for the poor. It's a conversation of every human. How am I being? How am I showing up? And how does that influence everything else in the system around me? We will create the change that we want on a human level and on an individual level, on a collective level, on an organizational level, in partnership with our other G20 partners, in partnership with all our civic organizations, with our strategic players, with our business schools. We will make this change if we are prepared to do the difficult work. This work is not easy. If it was easy, we would already have a value-centered society. There are some uncomfortable conversations that need to happen. They need to be happening in a loving, kind, compassionate way that considers what somebody else might be experiencing and feeling. So as we go about values conversations, we want to do them in a value-led manner, in a values-based manner. So I'd like to leave you with some questions for reflection. How can I live my values more intentionally? How can I lead differently? And how can I be a partner in the co-creation of a just, inclusive, and sustainable society? Thank you, community.